And the Biden administration was ready to have a nuclear war with Russia. We got a hint of that when the director of plans for the Strategic Command, the guy who does the war planning, spoke on November 26th, I believe, at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and said that we are ready to have a nuclear exchange with Russia and win. I mean, so there's the fantasy that we can win a nuclear war, which is problematic. I mean, in so many levels, because you can never win a nuclear war. But their preparedness to do this. And when you couple that with a conversation I had with a senior Democratic congressman who was briefed by the CIA on their assessment about the Russians, I said, well, I know you can't get into classified briefings, but did they think the Russians were bluffing? And he said, no. The scary part wasn't that. He said that the CIA actually said the Russians aren't bluffing. He said the scary part was when the Biden administration said, we don't care. We're ready to have a nuclear war. That's how close we were. That's the mindset that existed there. The British Prime Minister, he's not our friend. Olaf Scholz is not our friend. Emmanuel Macron, he is not our friend. Europe is not our friend. Europe is desperately looking for relevance, and they're trying to get America to overcommit so that NATO becomes an indispensable part of America. It's the parasite trying to make itself a permanent attachment to the host. Trump has recognized NATO as a parasitic organization that sucks the life out of us. And he's challenged NATO to step up and pay more. They can't. They're incapable of doing that. That's not it. So we dodged a bullet there. I mean, but this is because of Europe. And remember, at the same time that Europe is leading us down a path, because Keir Starmer came to the United States on September 13th with his beautiful little red box with the papers that would have gotten us into a nuclear war with Russia. It's one thing if a parasite comes on and tries to fool you into believing that it's beneficial. Hi, I'm only here. It's like if you're a crocodile and you have that bird that comes in and sort of cleans your teeth and all that stuff. You're like, okay, I'll open my mouth and let you do that. But not if you're remora attaching yourself to a shark and then putting worms in there and the shark dies eventually. NATO and Europe is trying to say, no, we're here. We're your friend. We're here for your benefit. But they're not. They're a life-sucking parasite. They instead align themselves fully with the outgoing administration, seeking to undermine Trump, to Trump-proof policies, to make sure that when Trump became president, he was trapped in conflicts and in a political direction that he could not extricate himself from. And the number one direction they wanted to go is to ensure that Donald Trump could not make a peace with Russia over Ukraine. This is why we were even closer to nuclear war in December than ever before, because the Biden administration was working with the Europeans to actually, pump up the volume, so to speak. And for Trump especially, after he won the election, NATO and Europe went into Trump-proofing mode. Think about what I'm saying. This is the man who was just elected president by the people of the United States with a convincing mandate for change. He will be the president of the United States for the next 4 years. The man that Europe had been betting on lost. His party is out. So instead of saying, well, gosh, we have to adapt to this reality, let's go see what the American boss wants because they know who the boss is. So now you're Donald Trump and you're going, you guys did what? And now Europe's like, oh no, what were we thinking? We want to be your friend. We want to be on you. And Trump's like, no. Europe's falling apart, and it's all over for Europe as it currently is configured, and we're looking at something totally new emerging. And this is where I come back to people who, try to belittle Donald Trump. And I think it's going to succeed, but that means that Europe is going to have to fundamentally change. We see a situation where Emmanuel Macron will definitely lose the next presidential election by 18 to 20 points to Marine Le Pen, who is no fan of continuing this conflict. Starmer's his support is collapsing. He'll be the sixth British prime minister in the last 2 years, or since 2016, so the last 8 years. But I mean, lately they've just been falling like flies. You've got potential change, dramatic change in Germany, change in Romania. Uh, I feel sorry for Maloney in Italy because she's like, do I want to be, or anti-Europe? What am I supposed to be? I don't know, because Europe's falling apart around her. She was invited to, Mar-a-Lago to be with Trump, because I think, she's the one European leader that isn't permanently tainted with Russophobia. And every Russian I talk to, when they talk about how important this is, it's personal to them because they all lost family members. They all lost everything. And the tears come in their eyes. So, I went to a Russian war monument. I think it was dealing with Sevastopol. And you go in there and you go through, and there's this corridor where the names of the fallen are carved into a wall, and you hear their voices coming at you. And then you walk in, and it's like an auditorium, and you see the faces, and then it turns into the stars. And the implication is that 27 million souls are looking down on you and judging you every day for your actions, to ensure that the way you live your life today honors the sacrifice they made to give you the life that you're living today. And this isn't propaganda. This is as real as it gets. And then she said something very interesting. And again, in the West, I struggle to try and impart on Americans how utterly essential the memory of the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, is to defining the existence of modern day Russians. That it's not propaganda. It's not Putin doing this. It resonates with. Maria Zakhareva cried when she talked about her mother and bread. I don't know if you remember that conversation. She talked about the importance of bread and why bread means so much to her. Because back in World War II, her grandmother sustained her mother on grams of bread, and they would starve to death without it. Bread was life. And so you can't today be at a dinner table and leave bread on your plate. You have to eat that bread because that bread is the symbol of life. And she cried. And this is a hard woman. And so Maria Zakhareva goes on and she says, understand this, that if we let you back in, we understand who you work for, and you will be kicked out if your government ever disgraces the memory of the fallen, the role played by the Soviet Union in liberating Europe, defaces the monuments, belittles the sacrifice made in the special military operation, that Europe has to stand up and not just be silent about Russia's role in World War II victory, but to acknowledge it, and also to acknowledge that what Russia did in Ukraine was of an equal status to that. This is Russia asserting itself like it hasn't done in a very long time. When you have, because I hear people say, well, Trump only has one term, and so we can write it out. Go back in history, guys. Let's look at two-term presidents. Nothing happens in their first term. Maybe some domestic stuff, but on the foreign policy stuff, they aren't liberated to do things foreign policy-wise until their second term. And they initiate the negotiations, and whatever changes are made at the end of the second term. The end of the second term. So they start something, and then it's up to the next administration to see it through. And that's why oftentimes we get reversals and things slow down. So that's why people have been sort of critical of the changes that America is capable of doing, because as Vladimir Putin said, you have a president who says things on the campaign trail, he comes in and the men in black suits and the briefcases come in and suddenly he changes. Well, Trump has destroyed the men in the black suits and the briefcases. They no longer exist. They're no longer in power, so they can't influence him. And the other thing that is happening now is that Trump no longer trusts Europe as a singularity. He has said this on several occasions, that he is stopping any interaction with Europe as a singularity, meaning that Ursula von der Leyen and Kallas, is she from Estonia? This new foreign minister of the European Union, Kelly Kallas or something of that nature, who just on a daily basis is insulting America. Again, pro hint to people out there: you're allowed to hate us, really, and I think you have justification in many times to hate us. We haven't been the best of friends, and we haven't been good neighbors, and you can say all that stuff. However, we're still the biggest dog in the block. And the smart thing is to pet us and maybe feed us some trees.
Right.
Okay, that's the smart approach. Europe is being put in line. Trump will not deal with Europe as a singularity anymore. Trump has said that he will deal with Europe in terms of bilateral relations with European nations, which is the end of the European Union. But if you want to take the big dog who's already irritated, remove his food bowl, kick him, punch him, tease him, he's going to turn on you and swallow you. Europe has insulted America one too many times. Again, if you're going to insult us, be willing to stand on your own. Stand up and say, I am somebody that is capable of operating without you and willing to operate without you. So therefore, I thumb your, we can get into Monty Python insults, when you're not able to do that, when you are the dog that still has the leash attached, to the collar held by the person you're insulting, don't be surprised when they yank that over there and put you in line. Now, one would think that they would have learned from the lessons of Zelensky that if you need America to keep you alive, the last thing you should be doing is insulting America. But these guys came in already snake bit. You see, they had bought into the Biden formulation of relationships, premised on the notion that the American president would be willing to stand before the international world and proclaim loudly and repeatedly that America has a sacred bond, a sacred duty, a sacred obligation to NATO, which is a lie. It was a lie when Biden said it. We have no such sacred duty, obligation, or honor. But Biden was pontificating and Europe bought into that. And then Europe doubled down by, engaging in Ukraine decisively, because in the aftermath of the humiliation that NATO suffered in Afghanistan at the hands of the United States, this was their last chance for redemption. This was their last chance for relevance. They had to make Ukraine work. So they went in very strong in hopes of dragging America in with them, and it almost worked. It almost worked too well. It almost got us to the point where we were near nuclear war with Russia last fall. As in the spirit of transparency, I hope that the Trump administration will release the records, the internal documents, the discussions between the United States and others, the CIA briefings that were given to Congress, et cetera, about how close we were to a nuclear war, that we were closer than anybody even possibly knows. So Trump is already predisposed to be as anti-European as possible. And yet it's very difficult, even given the disaster of the current state of affairs between Europe and the United States, to extricate yourself from decades of entanglement. The roots go deep. The parasite has literally gotten into your organs. And so even Trump has to slow roll this thing, hence the attention that we give to Europe. Even though we go to Europe to create chaos, we still feel obliged to engage with Europe and to be considerate of what Europe says. But then Europe does a Zelensky and starts insulting the president, starts insulting America, starts insinuating that they call the shots, not America. And then the best one is, we can go it alone. We don't need America, which is music to Trump's ears, going, really? I thought for a second that this divorce meant that I was going to have joint custody of the problem child. But you're telling me you want sole custody of the problem child. I'm on board. It's all yours. Europe has committed suicide, literal suicide, because Trump is going to jettison the Ukraine issue from the American, problem set, and he is going to turn it all over to Europe, and Europe can't handle it. So Europe says we want to sit at the table. Listen to what the Americans are saying today. You don't get to sit at this table. This is the American-Russian table. This is the big boy table. You guys are the insubordinate teenagers in the back of the house that have been put there to stay away from bothering the adults. But eventually we're going to send the leftovers to you so you finish it up so we have clean plates. That's what's happening here. That's the table Europe gets to sit at. What Rubio said is, for Europe to lift the sanctions, Europe has to make good with Russia. Not Europe and America. America is going to make good with Russia no matter what. We're going to resolve this issue from our perspective. It's up to Europe, and Europe is abandoned. And that's what they've said. When this is done, listen to Rubio. He said, we can't tell Europe to lift sanctions. Those are European sanctions. I think they just passed their 16th cycle of sanctions, or tranche, or whatever they call it, as if Russia is panicking now. I think I got several emails from my Russian friends saying, we have to surrender. Sorry, Scott. We can't withstand European sanctions anymore. It's all over. No, Russia could care less. And the Balts have to be very careful, because while the Russians are not inclined to do any major military operation against the Baltic states, it's not what they want. Russia's not going to stand by idly while the Balts try to destabilize Kaliningrad, which is Russia. And it will become violent very quickly and will end detrimentally to the Balts. And because NATO won't be able to respond, because the United States won't allow it to respond, it just further underscores the reality that NATO is, nothing more than a paper tiger. It's curious because we talked earlier about, what's motivating Trump, et cetera. Trump has made some statements about BRICS. BRICS is dead. And if they go after that BRICS currency, I'll tariff them 100%. And so BRICS is dead. And I'm like, Donald, if you remember when Vladimir Putin pulled the 100 BRICS note out in Kazan and said, hey, look at this beautiful piece of paper here. He said, we don't really want to do this. He said, de-dollarization isn't what we're pursuing. In fact, we all want to use the dollar. But you got to let us use the dollar. And if you don't let us use the dollar, then we have to find an alternative. I don't know if you saw Maria Zakharova's statement today. It's brilliant. It's just genius. She said, you guys want to make us believe that you're independent businesses. But when we didn't kick you out, you opted out by obeying the orders of your masters in Europe, which means that you're not businesses, but you're economic weapons. You're weapons that can be employed anytime your political masters decide it to be employed. And so, Trump now is, all of the BRICS nations said, we're not de-dollarizing if you let us use the dollar. And Trump realizes that. Trump understands that in order for the dollar to be, the international currency, the reserve currency of the world has to be able to use the dollar. And so one of the important aspects of the Russian-American dialogue taking place, and this is again why I emphasize Wickoff and Dmitriev's involvement, because they're the shot makers here. They're the ones making this thing work. Everything else falls in behind the economic picture. Trump is going to open up the Russian economy to American investments in the American dollar. Now we come to Europe, and the Russians are already saying, all the European companies are starting to line up and say, hey, we're ready to come back, all the design. But there's pushback inside Russia, because you see, when Europe withdrew, there was a vacuum created. And part of the Russian resilience has been the ability of Russian investors and entrepreneurs to step up and fill the gap, especially when it comes to clothing and I don't want to use what's the term we use in the United States if something is expensive and such. It's not essential. So the Russians have stepped into the luxury field, and they're making things for the Russian people of high quality, and now you have Hugo Boss and others saying, hey, we want to come back. If you don't understand that Trump has initiated a revolution that has already redefined America will never be the same after this. Key institutions are collapsing because they can't justify their existence, because what they were doing was a lie. There was no transparency. Was un-American. The Department of Justice will never be the same. Will never be the same after this. The FBI, if Kash Patel comes in, will never be the same. The USAID is already totally redefined. Department of Education, we can go on and on. There is a revolution here at home. And that revolution, by destroying the establishment, is liberating Trump to go and do things globally that the establishment would never let him do, such as make peace with Russia, such as detach itself from this parasite called NATO. there are fundamental changes taking place in how America operates in the world, for better or for worse. We don't know. The jury's still out. But what we do know is that the game that you and I were talking about this time last year no longer exists. It's a completely new game with new rules that we don't even know what the rules are right now because everything is so much up in the air.